Hello, you are watching this video because you want to make your poem longer. There are 3 easy ways to make your poem longer. 1, ask and answer your own questions. 2, create a shift in your poem. And 3, turn one line into its own stanza. So, strategy number 1 is to ask and answer your own question. Just like in class, when you want to keep the conversation going or expand your ideas more, one way to do it is to ask a question. So I looked at my poem. I'm a little stuck. I read it over and I said to myself, you know what? My poem doesn't have any questions. So my first step was to add a question into my poem. So here it is. I says, I've been told I love too hard and too much, like a dam constantly about to burst, dripping, dripping, an ever pleasant flood risk. And so it's about my emotions being like held back. And so I decided to add the question, how long will this wall hold? And what's magic about adding a question is suddenly you can answer that question and it will generate a whole new stanza. So I actually took this question and I said, I'm going to make it its own stanza. And I started with the question. And then my next 4 lines was answering my own question. And what's amazing is that I have a whole new stanza, and all it took was asking a question to myself. So, strategy 1, ask and answer your own questions. It's magic, it'll expand your poem like crazy. The second thing you can do is to create a shift in your poem. And what I mean by shift is a small contrast or a small change. So, for example, if you spent your whole poem talking about the past, maybe it's time to make a shift and talk about the future. If you spent your whole poem talking about mistakes, maybe it's time to make a shift and talk about what you learned. If you spent your whole poem talking about a family member who wasn't there, maybe it's time to take a shift and talk about how you grew up to be stronger. A shift is any change in direction that helps you go down a new path. And what's powerful about a shift is once you find yourself going down a new path, then it feels like you're not repeating yourself anymore. And you give yourself a little bit more room to write in a new direction. So, for example, my poem already has a couple shifts. I spend the first part talking about being an Aquarius, and then I talk about being a Pisces. So, that's my first shift. And then I make another shift, and my next part is about balance. And so you can see me slowly switching topics to give myself more to talk about. I spoke to a student earlier today who is writing about their past, and now he's going to make his next stanza about his now. And so it's a good example of a shift. My third tip is to be on the lookout for lines that have a lot of meaning or a lot of potential and turn them into their own stanza. So, for example, I was reading a poem about this. I was born a Scorpio, born in the end of November at the end of the year. That's probably why I'm last for everything. And this person who wrote this poem saw this line and they were like, you know what? That line has a lot of potential. And I want to expand on this idea that I'm last for everything. And so they took this and they made it into its own stanza. Last online for food, last one to call, last one to play ball, last one to start, last one to end. They took that one thing and they made it a whole stanza. So you want to be on the lookout for lines that have a lot of potential, or you could make a little bit more specific or very powerful. So, for example, sorry, I read this earlier today. I'm a 15-year-old girl in high school. It can be tough, but you have to remember the positive parts because time flies like no other. And I was like, oop, I see an example of a line that could be more specific. What are the positive parts about being a 15-year-old girl in high school? I feel like you could take that, make it its own stanza, and suddenly you're expanding your ideas. So do not leave any vague lines in your poem. Any line that is vague is an opportunity to expand your ideas. So, to recap, 3 major ways to expand your ideas. 1, ask and answer your own questions. 2, create a shift in your poem. And 3, turn a line into its own stanza. Good luck. I believe in you. Enjoy.